You're good, Michael. Well done. Okay, so we're live now. Awesome. Thank you for doing that. We are on the home stretch, aren't we? Is that great? We have a good full meeting for today, and actually we should do the territorial announcement, shouldn't we? We just advance. So Comox Valley respectfully acknowledges the land on which we gather is unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation and the traditional keepers of this land. I just want to, just before we go to minutes, just say we just wanted to make one slight alteration to the agenda for today. At 10:10, the last bullet says TACPAC consideration of the final draft report. We welcome discussion and questions at that point, but we'd like to come back because we actually have a request for decision. We'll want a motion from the committee to advance the report with whatever amendments you want to make or none to the steering committee. So we'll have a discussion at 10:10, but at 10:50 at the end of that discussion, we'll actually ask for a motion. So with that alteration to the agenda, could we have a motion to accept the agenda for today? Thank you. Andrew, seconded by Ian. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Great. And we'll hear from those people online by raising your hand. So we'll try really hard to pay attention to you online. The first item of business are the meeting minutes. Any questions about the minutes or any suggested changes? A motion for adoption then? Andrew, thank you. Moved, seconded by? Thanks, Tabitha. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Communications update and roundtable.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we're just going to provide a brief update of the What We Heard report that was attached to your agenda package. So next slide, please. So just to start with an overview of our public engagement efforts from 2021 to 2024. 2021 was our first open house following the Sewage Commission decision to receive Area A wastewater into the regional system and the subsequent work done to pursue that solution. The community has continued since that time to be really actively engaged in this project with high attendance at both in-person open houses and our webinars and really healthy website traffic, as you can see. The numbers here on the website traffic are for the engagement platform only, which was launched in May of 2023. While most visitors access the page directly through the CVRD's main website, the Comox Valley Record website and Facebook also continue to be popular sources of directing traffic to that page. Next slide. So our January 2024 engagements included 2 open houses and a webinar, which were attended by the CVRD project team, WSP consultants, Ron Frank representing Comox First Nation, elected officials, and also many members of the PAC. So thank you everybody that was able to come out to those events. The invitation that we sent out to residents encouraged them to view the draft addendum report summary, which was posted to the project page. And also included an info sheet which summarized project details to date. Our goal for these events was really to inform the community on a summary of the last June 2023 What We Heard report that came out of those public engagement events, update project costs and cost to homeowners, updates on the collection system design, and the septic deferral program and septic maintenance program updates, as well as an overview of the draft addendum report that is proposed to be submitted to the project or to the province, excuse me. Next slide, please. So there are 9 key themes that we heard about, and today I'm just going to summarize the top 6. So similar to the last events, cost concerns remain the top issue, followed by questions about phasing and timing for future phases. The main themes from this round of engagement included continued concerns about high costs for residents and questions about how costs would be broken down per property. Residents are becoming familiar with project information, and there's more certainty and understanding about which phases residents are located in and project boundaries, which is good. There is also general hope that we heard from the public and support for the project's completion, as well as encouragement to complete the project as quickly as possible. And there are fewer questions and comments now about the overall project plans, but we did receive more questions and comments about specific details like the pump stations and pipe locations and connections to individual homes. This feedback has been compiled from 5 different sources. So feedback that was shared with staff members at the in-person events, questions posted by participants during the online webinar, feedback forms submitted at the events and online, and questions and comments submitted by phone and email or posted to the project page. And all feedback has been compiled into the What We Heard report, which was in your agenda package that will be shared with the community in the coming weeks and also included in the addendum report that will be submitted to the province. Next. So overall, we're really pleased with the level of engagement and participation in the community on this project. There were around 115 people that attended the January in-person open houses and 28 people joined the webinar. We collected a total of 36 feedback forms that were submitted both online and in person. And a high number of people viewed the webinar after the fact on YouTube. Yeah, Tabitha.
Relative to other meetings, is that a good turnout? I just don't know. Is that high turnout or average?
Yeah, it's definitely a fairly high turnout. Yeah.
Andrew?
Andrew. Yeah, sorry. Can you use your mic, Andrew? Thank you.
I hit the button. How does the total population we've engaged relate to the total population the project will serve? Yeah, I'm kind of curious what percentage of people who will have to connect are actually engaged in this. I think that's an important number to understand.
Yeah, so there are just over 900 properties kind of within the project area. So you can see those are the properties that we've engaged with directly by mail out. And then obviously a high percentage of those have attended the in-person open houses and webinars and engaged through the project page. But
I'm thinking it looks about maybe 50%, which is actually pretty good for public engagement. So I just think that's important for people to understand, like half of the people who have to connect probably they've read a postcard, they might be grumbling, but we haven't actually heard from them.
Yeah.
So if you look at 408 people attending all the open houses, is that 408 like independent, like unique visitors or 408 total?
for the open houses?
Yeah.
We didn't track that. We did hear from quite a few new people at the most recent events, but we didn't track kind of which were return visitors and which were not. Yeah.
I don't know if there's time. It might be worth doing to understand the number of unique people who have engaged.
Yeah.
Get a feel for the total percent of that 923 who are actually engaged in this. You don't want to find out, you know, you're starting to put pipe in and then you hear from someone you haven't heard from who's so opposed to it they chain themselves to a backhoe or something. So I think it'd be good context for everyone to understand that actual total engagement. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And I guess just on that note, the postcards that were sent, well, I guess during both rounds of engagement to invite people to the open houses also included kind of a project backgrounder. So people were receiving project related information directly to their mailbox. Yeah, so next steps. Yeah, so next steps for public engagement. So like I said, we will be distributing the What We Heard report or posting it to our website and also distributing it online electronically to our list of project subscribers. Once the draft addendum is officially submitted, we will update the project timeline and information on the website as well to indicate this. And then from there, the next touch point with the community will be in 2025 when we are starting the stage 3 planning process and bringing the draft combined sewer plan for the CVSS back out to the community.
Derry, can I just ask so for the addendum approval from the province, I think previously we had talked about 6 months for the approval, and so that'll come back, go into the full project submission to the province, and then there'll be another approval process from the province, right? That's why the 2026 estimated completion from the province. Yeah, okay.
That's right. So we're anticipating to get comments back on the addendum before we submit the stage 3 plan. And it's the stage 3 plan that then goes to the province for final approval. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
One thing that came to my mind when I saw this slide was, how does this affect shovels in ground? My understanding was we were to be complete in 2026, phase 1, right? And this would indicate if we don't have approval, we don't put shovels in ground till 2026. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So at this point, we're estimating starting construction kind of late 26 after we receive that provincial approval, or early 27. We're not exactly sure on the timelines of the provincial review and approval process. And then estimating completing construction in 2028.
Thank you.
Jim.
Do you have a timeline of a estimated date for confirmation of partner funding?
Yeah, so at this point, we're hoping to have that confirmation this fall and be able to share that information with the community then.
Any other questions, Andrew?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something you and I discussed at the open house, Derry, about engaging registered on-site wastewater practitioners and professionals who do on-site wastewater design. I don't know if that's being put into the plan yet. I think that'll be a critical step, like as we discussed. So just so everyone knows for background, I have a client in Union Bay. They're looking at doing a renovation that adds a bedroom. So to add a bedroom, they have to update their on-site wastewater system. But in 3 or 4 years, they could be connected. So that's a $50,000 investment they're looking at. Then they'll get, maybe 10 years life out of a 25 to 50 year system, and then they have to connect. So I think it's worthwhile to have some separate engagement with the people who actually do that work in the area, so they can start strategizing how to make that cost effective to their clients. Otherwise, you're gonna have a lot of people spending a lot of money, not necessarily understanding the impacts and maybe not being very happy about it.
Yeah.
I just want, my question is that in the plan to have those engagement sessions?
Yes, yeah, certainly. And together with Island Health as well, because they'll be the regulatory authority that will be looking after.
And I'll repeat my offer to help out with those. I think I could maybe help translate some of this to on-site wastewater practitioners. I work with a lot of them on a daily basis, so definitely be willing to help with that process.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Any other questions?
With regard to public feedback there, I just wanted, you and Norm and I have been having communications with one of the neighbors from Kilmarnock about the pump station there. How is that included in a public feedback? When would be the appropriate time to perhaps raise 1 or 2 of Steve's questions?
Yeah, so certainly we can talk about them at any time. Those comments are captured kind of generally in the What We Heard report under that kind of theme category. So they are included there, but certainly happy to either have more detailed discussion on that point now, or we can discuss it when we're looking at the addendum report in total.
The specific question that, and I need to go back and look at the email again. The specific question that comes to mind right now is the questions around the Kilmarnock pump station and the decisions that I guess we all took with respect to not having a regional pump station up by the highway, right? That it in fact becomes a regional pump station in Montrose Park. So that would be the piece that I think bears a bit further discussion here. I just don't want to hijack it now if that now is not the right time.
Yeah.
Or if you need somebody from engineering or whatever to help with that question.
Well, I've got one more slide here, so why don't I finish that and then maybe we can have, because after that, this presentation, we were hoping to have just a general roundtable discussion on feedback that you've all heard from the community, so yeah. Yeah, so just one last slide on First Nations consultation update. So as you all know, in addition to the public engagement, we will also continue to engage with Comox First Nation as a partner on this project. And also those nations that were identified in the provincial database to have overlapping traditional territory within the project boundaries. We have no additional updates to provide at this time, but our next point of contact with the nations will be to provide a summary of the final draft addendum report that will be brought forward to the steering committee in April if we receive support from this committee to do that. So yeah, that's the end of my slide deck. As I said, we were hoping to have a bit of a roundtable discussion, just hear from everybody here on feedback that they've heard from community members, either at the open houses or through direct communication. So I'll leave it there.
Maybe we can just literally go around the table. We'll maybe start with you, Ian, if you like.
Yeah, the email I referenced is from a neighbor. The neighbor doesn't describe their circumstance, which is they are directly across the street from Montrose Park where the pump station is going to be, or is planned in place. They are planning on building a carriage house towards the street side of their property, which would be the carriage house is probably close to building proximity to the pump station. Perhaps one neighbor's house might be a little bit closer. I don't actually know this neighbor's background, but he writes quite well, writes in an informed manner, read the report, all those sorts of things. And has raised a bunch of questions that, you know, some of which are just really just good feedback that go into the summary of what we've heard. But the one question that I found was quite interesting was around the idea, he phrased it as a comment. He said one comment is the decision to turn pump station number 3 into a de facto regional pump station. And what he does a bunch of different technical things, but he would reference the information on the Royston pump stations, and that one of the reasons for moving to a regional pump station strategy was to minimize impact on neighbors to the pump station, to move the bigger, noisier, potentially odor producing. Sorry, the microphone hasn't been on.
Just lift it up maybe a little bit, and it is on. It's just not.
Not picking up. Okay. So sorry, I'm just catching back up. The noise and the potential for odors, and you'd say, why wasn't the Craig Derrick pump station given the same consideration as to perhaps having a regional pump station up towards the highway, as opposed to having all sewage flow into the Kilmarnock pump station and back out again? So I'm just phrasing the question, and I thought it would be just good for us to hear or explore what considerations had been given in that way, or if they hadn't yet been given, what opportunity we have to give consideration as design for future phases comes up.
So I'll maybe attempt to address some of those questions, but then I'll turn it over to Ian from WSP to answer some of the more technical questions. But generally, I think if you look back to kind of some of the initial planning work for the project, the regional pump station concept was kind of a phase that was added into the project after phase 1B as kind of a necessity to add additional capacity to the system at that time. When we started to look in more detail at the Royston pump station location and consider some of the mitigation works that would be needed because it is within the coastal flood zone. We started to understand a little bit more kind of the general size of a building structure there that would be needed to help to kind of protect that infrastructure from potential coastal flood events. So that was when we started to look at the potential of advancing the regional pump station at an earlier phase than originally considered as kind of one option to mitigate the coastal flood impacts. There were a couple other options also considered, and all three of those options will be brought forward into kind of the stage 3 planning work as we do detailed design and really kind of make more decisions around what that pump station will look like. In terms of, I guess, planning for the Kilmarnock pump station, maybe I'll turn that over to Ian to kind of speak to where we're at in the design process and some of the considerations that can still be made in terms of the design and location of that infrastructure. If he's there.
Ian,
Yep.
are you
Yep.
with us?
Yep, thank you so much. Yeah, Ian, thank you for the question, and I think it's important, and thank you for taking the time to speak to the neighbors and go through the process. But it's important to note that the pump station 3 is still a few years away, at least 6 to 10 years away. So we are still we're still part of the planning phase for this. So we moved the pump station itself to the prelim design stage. But for us to get to detailed design, there's much more information required. The geotech, the archaeology, the environmental assessment, the survey. It's just with the information that we have and with the previous site location study that was done, this was a workable site. Once again, it is still on a high level. It is important to note that pump station 1, 3, and 6, the final position has not been finalized. It is not been locked in, as this still needs to wait for detailed design. So that is important to note. What also on the idea of what's a pump station 3, the Kilmarnock pump station is a regional pump station. That was never intended to be, although it uses it pumps a lot of flow. I think once again we're looking at the year 2070 at this point, of 2076. So it's still about 50 years away where we look to get to a 200 liters per second type pump station. And that is based on a phased approach. So to have this impact reduced. Then yes, your question is if we need to look at something similar to pump station 1 to have a small localized pump station and then pump it across the road to a larger pump station. That can be investigated. However, that will increase the cost by a lot, because now we have property that's owned by someone else, and we have additional pump station that will add to the cost. So that's just important to note. And then, like Derry said, there were the 3 main reasons why pump station 1 received more.
Hi, John. My name is Ian Hesselgrave, and I have been in receipt of a national defense pension for a.
Sorry. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Michael is attending to this. We're good.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ian. Sorry about that.
No problem. So the reason for pump station 1 receiving a bit more attention was it was already part of this first phase. So it is less than 5 years away that it will actually be constructed. It has gone through an value engineering process where some items were identified, but in the course of it, the main reason for that was for that pump station was the fact that we have limited space at the preferred location, as well as, like Derry mentioned, it is below the coastal flood levels, and that needed to be adjusted. So we looked at 3 different options: either building in like a bunker, like a watertight structure, or we move the electrical equipment away, or we keep it to a localized pump station and then have a regional pump station or a larger pump station higher up the road. But that, even we have those 3 options, but that final decision has also not been made, Ian. So that is important to note as well. So that is on the question of the regional pump station for Kilmarnock. Then, just on the location of pump station 3, we have, due to the environmental impact, once again, this is still very preliminary. We have to move the pump station in any case a bit further into the park, so closer to the highway. So it's now almost positioned centrally in the park to be away from all of that. So it is clear that that final position has not been it has not been finalized, so that is important to note. And then that we at this point, it is really in the middle of the park, to be as far as away from the neighbors. I know in some of the drawings, because if some of the information that Stephen referred to comes from the original, I think it was TACPAC meeting 3B. So that was still at the beginning, and now with more environmental information, we have to move it with more, as the time will go on, as we get geotechnical information, as an archaeology study is done, as the survey is done, this thing might move again, because it is just at this point where it is as a workable solution. Then, to address the questions of the odor control and the impact. So what we've done and was this phase approach. So you'll see initially this pump station will only pump in the order of 58 to 60 liters a second when it gets on trucks, and so it's quite small. And then but the infrastructure will allow it to add additional pumps. So at the point we will start off with 1 duty pump and 1 standby pump, and eventually that wet well can accommodate 2 duty pumps and 1 standby. And then we have provision to add another wet well pump station. But then at that point, we already need to twin the line. So we need to do another line next to the existing one, because that is just, once again, based on a 50-year horizon. Also, on the pump station, we have selected level control for this pump station. So our wet well, so our actual amount of volume that's sewage that's in the pump station will be reduced a lot at the beginning. So our pump, there won't be that much flow coming in, but the volume will be reduced, and that will just be by a sensor. So as soon as it hits, there's enough flow for the pump to pump it, it will start pump it immediately, and then it will wait for another 10 minutes, pump it again, to make sure that we keep the minimum flow in the wet well. That's why we have the allowance for 3 pumps, but we would only install 2 at the beginning. Then we also have allowed for odor control in the form of carbon filters to remove and to recirculate the air in that. I don't know, Ian, that was now quite a mouthful from my side. Does that address your concerns or your comments?
Yes, thank you for the thorough answer. This is really bringing forward a question that I hadn't heard explained fully as to the decision to have what appears to be a regional pump station down close to Kilmarnock Drive in Montrose Park. And so I think your answer is something that we can direct our neighbor to. And to say to listen to the video at approximately 9:20 in the morning. But I can also go back to him with that and have him provide whatever further feedback he wants to do or wants to give with respect to your answer. So my intent was not to create a debate to say we should change the design, but it was to really understand a little more fully as to where we were at. And to know that that pump station is not locked in design and its location is not locked in, and that input is being taken into consideration. So thank you.
I will just add to Ian's comments too, that we will be hearing from Current Environmental a little bit later on in the agenda, and they'll be providing a little bit more information around some of the environmental considerations in Montrose Park that Ian referred to.
We'll continue our roundtable then, just carrying on. And Norm, do you have any comments coming out of the public participation? Okay, Sam? Any comments? No? Yeah? Jim?
I think the biggest thing I heard from people at the public participation sessions and other people that have contacted me is skepticism. Skepticism around the partner funding. So the sooner that can be nailed down, the better, because many people feel that partner funding is not going to happen and this project will not happen. So that's something that I think needs as much effort put into as possible to finalize that as soon as possible. If I just make a quick comment to Ian, though, the noise on one of those pump stations, there's virtually no noise. The pumps are down in the wet well. Odor, I'm not going to comment on that because at one time people said the treatment plant would have no odor. So I'm not going to comment on that. But basically the funding aspect of it is the biggest feedback I've heard from people at the sessions.
Jerry, did you want to respond in any way? Okay, yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll just follow. The odor question really depends on what kind of pump station. So a local pump station is moving effluent relatively regularly, so you have less odor. A regional pump station that gets effluent from other areas that's been in the system longer can have more odor. But filters hopefully take care of all of it. But like Jim, I wouldn't say there would be no odor. It's a very risky thing to say. The public feedback thing, I raised my concern. It's about people looking at new systems before this comes in place and how that deferral will work, what that investment looks like, what their payoff looks like. So I understand that'll be explored. So that's the concern I'm getting more from clients than from the public. So clients we're working with in these areas. Thanks.
Tabitha? Ken?
Yeah, mine's a sort of more general comment. I think the process has been very good at trying to engage the residents that are going to be involved. But I always do muse, is there a segment of the population that in spite of all the best attempts still remains remarkably ignorant as to what's going to happen? And it's always, we talk about the people who are engaged seem well engaged, but is there not a large subset of the population that is hard to get at? And I just wonder, is there any way that one can find out what percentage of the residents still remain remarkably ignorant as to what's happening? Question mark.
Derry, did you, and I apologize if you referred to this earlier, but is there any indication of unique hits on the website? Do you have any sense of that as a representation of how many people have gone in there?
I don't have those numbers
Yeah.
off the top of my head, but they are included in that what we heard report. So
Okay.
that is tracked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think of all of the places that might be, a total number might be most interesting, but yeah, best efforts. There's still probably people out there that don't know what's going on. Yeah. Any other comments about them? No? Okay. Okay. Ella?
Yeah, just the main thing I heard at the open houses was just a lot of questions around what that septic regulatory bylaw is gonna look like and how that's gonna impact the people that are waiting in all the different phases and things. And then the other question that came up was people, oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, the main question that came up was just how the septic regulatory bylaw is going to impact everybody, and especially the people in the different phases, what that's going to look like. And then people did have questions on decommissioning their septic tank. I know we briefly talked about it, and if they could be repurposing the septic tank for perhaps like rainwater, like irrigation purposes. So yeah.
Thanks. Any other comments? Yep. Ian?
I think it probably everybody's aware of it, right? But a undertone of all the discussions at all the open houses I went to was, we want this to happen. Wow, it costs a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that there is still this idea that is there more that can be done? You know, are there more sources of funds? Is there more, quote, tin cupping that can be done to bring in additional sources of funding to lower that annual cost or the overall cost of the project? So I'm not suggesting that we stop things and we do that, but I'm just making sure that that is a part of this discussion. That cost remains, in my mind, the biggest issue that people have, that they're supportive of this as a concept, but they're kind of going, how am I going to afford this? And then there's some low income people that it's really going to impact strongly. And then as I say that, the more we do to phase 1A means that that's the more we have to do the future phases as well, in terms of keeping cost equity in place and all those sorts of things. So I think whatever we can do in terms of communicate or making sure we're at that cost and making sure that we are communicating to future phases, that equity will be not enforced, but you know, that will be a guiding principle of future phases, is equity with the first phase. I think is really important. I'll stop there for a sec. I do have one more comment, but I just want, in case somebody else had something to say.
Tabitha?
Sorry, I was going to ask this earlier and then I kind of forgot. So in terms of to question, I guess, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I mean, when I read this skim, I will be honest, skim this 600-page report, I don't know if I read that before, forgot, whatever. I can't identify what's changed without track changes. And so I guess generally out of the community engagement, were there changes to the report? Or, and like maybe I know that we're going to discuss that, but were those changes based on the community engagement or based on other things, I guess is the question.
Good question.
Yeah, thanks, Tabitha. We will be going over the report in a little bit more detail next, but generally, so after the June engagement events, the feedback that we received was incorporated into the draft report, mainly around, as you saw, the changes to the collection system design. Coming out of these most recent engagement events, we didn't hear, you know, really any kind of significant changes or different comments from the community. Certainly any feedback we did receive was included in the most recent report and will be attached, you know, as an addendum when submitted to the province, but there were no real, I guess, significant changes to the technical content of the report.
Back to you, Ian.
Yeah, my last comment is really around this idea of engagement that both Ken and Andrew have raised. My personal view on this is the CVRD has done a really good job of trying to engage and give residents every opportunity to understand, whether that be through one-way mailings or that be through open houses. There is going to be a subset of population who does not engage. Or does not actively engage. We don't know if they're passively engaged by reading and accepting, or if they passively engage by reading and rejecting. But that's their choice, right? That I believe we've done enough. And that if there's somebody that comes out afterwards and says, I didn't know, how much more could we have done to say, how could we have gotten to you? Like I was joking with Norm to say, do we need one of those trucks with a megaphone on it to drive around neighborhoods? I think, no, we've done enough here, right? And I wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you. Any other comments coming out of the public consultation? Okay, I'm going to suggest, because we're a little early, that we carry on. Can we carry on and maybe take a break at 10:15 or so? Was that, would committee's fine with that? It seems a little early for a break yet, so. Would 10:15 be fine? Okay, why don't we push on?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the addendum report, kind of a bit of a recap from the last meeting, and then just a couple quick notes on what's changed. So we had this slide as well at our last meeting, but just a reminder on kind of the purpose of the liquid waste management planning process. So it's really a forward-looking process that can be particularly effective in areas like the South region, where there may be considerable growth and development in future, or where there are known problems associated with existing infrastructure like aging septic systems. And the two primary objectives of the planning process are really to protect public health and the environment and to properly consult the public. So again, just a reminder of the process that we're currently following for this particular addendum. So after we finalize the addendum report and submit it to the province for review, the two LWMP processes will then merge, so the addendum process and the core service process, into a combined stage 3 planning process. And the Sewer Extension South project will be further advanced as part of this stage 3 plan, which will then be submitted to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for approval. So as reviewed at our last meeting, the draft addendum report is really a summary of all of the information that we've discussed over the last 5 meetings. I'll just provide a quick recap of each of the 7 main sections in the report. So section 1, of course, introduction and acknowledgements. The second section of the report includes a summary of the PACTAC meetings to date, with meeting minutes and materials attached as appendices, along with a summary of consultation with Comox First Nation and other First Nations with an interest in the plan area, as well as a summary of the public consultation to date. Section 3 provides the context upon which the servicing plans for the South were developed. This includes service area boundaries and population projections, along with a summary of the CDRD's land use bylaws in the area. The 4th section, regulations and guidelines, includes a brief discussion of guidelines for inflow and infiltration, wastewater volume reduction, and wastewater source control, along with some proactive policies and measures that may be implemented in the South to ensure best management of this new infrastructure. That section also includes discussion of septic systems in the plan area, along with commitments to explore the development of a septic regulatory bylaw. The 5th section, project design, starts with a summary of sewer flows and organic load projections for the South region, and discussion of some of the design considerations and engineering principles that were accounted for during the development of the system configuration. It then describes project phasing and catchment area selection for the neighborhood collection systems, followed by the preliminary design for the project, including the force main, the 3 pump stations, and the community collection systems for phase 1A and 1B. Section 6 summarizes the environmental impact study that was completed by Current Environmental, and we will hear from them next on the agenda. And finally, Section 7, cost impacts, summarizes the Class C project cost estimates for Phase 1A and 1B, and the Phase 1A property owner costs. And this section also includes that policy statement adopted by the committee related to cost equity for future phases of the project. So as I said, there wasn't a lot of changes from the report previously presented at the last TACPAC meeting. The most substantive changes really relate to the additional information provided in the updated environmental impact study that Current will be presenting. And these changes are mostly related to the inclusion of Phase 1B in the EIS. Other changes include updated collection system maps that correspond with the maps that were used at the most recent open houses, along with updates to the sections that include kind of the most recent committee meetings and open houses and engagement updates. So with that, any questions on what's changed or the report in general? Yeah.
Jim?
This isn't on what's changed, but it's just something that dawned on me on your septic bylaw that's being proposed. Is the purpose of it to decide whether a system is operating within standards, or is the purpose of it to have people upgrade their system to current standards? So what I'm getting at is if the system is working fine, but it may not be designed to the current design standards, is that going to be okay for people? Much like the building codes has been updated to require different structure for snow loads or insulation values, but we don't go in and ask people to put new windows in and put a new roof on their house because it doesn't meet the current standard. So that's kind of the gist of my question. My feeling is if the system is working fine and there's no failure of the system, then that should be all right and be allowed within the bylaw.
Yeah, I'll speak to that one a bit, Jim. The way we're proposing to implement the bylaws, it would have kind of two tiers. So broadly across all areas, we would be requiring people to have their systems pumped out on a 5-year basis, for instance. And then in some select higher risk areas, generally areas with higher dwelling density, lots smaller than, for instance, Island Hill's current 0.2 hectare minimum lot size for properties serviced by septic systems. In those areas, we would be mandating inspections by an authorized person. And yeah, if the inspection identifies that the system is operating as intended, then that system would get a pass.
So if I hear you correctly, as long as that system does not fail, then that would be fine within your bylaw then.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, as long as the system is operating as intended, potentially an inspection might identify a few remedial or additional maintenance activities that would be recommended. But generally, if the system is operating as intended, then it would get a pass.
That sounds like a very rational approach.
Any other questions about or comments on the revised report? So as I said, we'll come back to this for a decision after the environmental impact study presentation.
Yeah, that's right. So what we're going to be asking from the committee today is just a decision point about whether or not to kind of recommend this report moves forward to the steering committee for consideration, as well as any kind of additions or changes the committee might recommend as part of that decision. But we're going to first hear from Current on the updated EIS before we have the committee vote on that decision. I don't think they're here yet, are they? So we might want to take just a 15-minute break. Yeah, I think they were going to get here at 10, so.
Okay. Perfect. So why don't we do that? And if they're coming back at 10, come back at 5 after. It's coffee and treats in the coffee room. Thank you. Okay. Welcome. Okay, we'll just turn it over to you. You're going to provide an overview of the environmental impact study. Excellent. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, a little red light should go on.
Got it.
Perfect. There you go.
Okay. Morning, everyone. I'm Dusty Sylvester from Current Environmental. I'm a registered professional biologist, and we did the overview environmental sensitive areas assessment for the South Sewer. This is a update to a previous presentation we did in December of 2022. And we're looking at giving you a little bit of a summary of what we discussed at that time, just to kind of get everyone caught up on our original results. And then there's also the addition of the Kilmarnock neighborhood and pump station 3. So within the scope of what we looked at were what we term valued components or environmentally sensitive areas. Valued components is a bit more broad in that it also considers cultural, social, economic, historical, archaeological, and aesthetic values. This presentation is going to focus on the environmental. Within that scope, we also looked at potential sources of contamination, specifically hydrocarbons, known sources that exist within the study area, and some recommendations. Mitigation strategies that could reduce the potential impacts on both the management of potentially contaminated soils as well as environmental sensitive areas are going to be primary focus moving forward from this point in planning the project. So in 22, we looked at the contaminated sites history of the entire alignment as well as pump stations 1 and 6. And we found that there was a couple of sites of interest that were primarily situated around the pump station locations. The alignment itself is linear down the highway, so there's little overlap with scheduled site uses or known sources of contamination, although there are adjacent properties such as gas stations and fuel depots that could have an impact. One more. Within the environmentally sensitive areas, we identified 13 possible at-risk ecological communities. This isn't something in itself that is of particular concern to the project. It's more just for information purposes. There's 4 distinct habitat types as listed on the sensitive ecosystem inventory. That's a BC provincial database. 70 plus possible bird species, including 13 at risk. 5 active bald eagle nests that are in close proximity to the alignment. And this may have an impact on the timing of some of the works, depending on the nesting season and activity of those nests. And then 15 streams, ditches that require crossings, 9 of which that are fish bearing. The contaminated sites history of pump station 1. So this is near Royston. There is a known area of concern here where there was a bulk fuel spill in years past, and there was remedial activity done on it in 2000 and in 2012. It includes a private lot as well as the road base itself, and it overlaps with an archaeological sensitive area. The remediation here was managed and reported on, so there is history on it. However, the ultimate delineation of the site wasn't complete, so there could very well be overlap with the proposed pump station 1 site. Because the edges of the potential contamination are unknown, we recommend that some further investigation take place if work at this site is being pursued, and that could take the form of a phase 2 type ESA, which is basically going in and setting up a grid for sampling to determine whether there is, in fact, existing contamination and what those boundaries might be so that you can plan appropriate management of those soils during development of the pump station. This is just a street view of the location. The private lot to the left was, I think it was an Esso bulk station in years past. It's now a private property and there's plans to develop it into a residence at this point in time. So that portion to the left of the image has been remediated and is considered clean. They actually excavate down to bedrock. So they pull out all the soils and then replace them with fill. And likewise, through the center of the image on Marine Drive, there was also significant soils removed and replaced with import. But to the right where the park is and where the potential pump station would be located has not been well defined. Pump Station 6 in Union Bay. This is adjacent to the Kensington property. There is a known history of contamination in the general area associated with the transport of coal and other industrial uses in the past. There's significant deposits of coal slag in the area, and it's undetermined what the boundaries of potential sources of contamination are there. There's also high archaeological interactions as well. So until the pump station site is well established, it's undetermined whether there will be an interaction with potential contamination, but it's possible. And similar to Pump Station 1, we're recommending that further investigation of the site be done. This is just a view from the highway looking east towards the access point to the pump station area that's been heavily modified in recent years as well as in the past, and there has been quite a bit of study done for the development in this area associated with contaminated sites. So there's quite a bit of information already out there. Just a general overview of environmental sensitive areas. As mentioned, the majority of the project will be down the highway, so interactions with channels are likely to be limited unless we're doing culvert replacements. There are a few clear span crossings, including over the Trent River, 15 streams and ditches, none of which are fish bearing, as mentioned, and a variety of crossing types. So the image on the left is Trent River, so it's it's not exactly clear span because it has the piling supporting it, but it is elevated above the creek. And the Millard Creek crossing is a series of concrete pipes, and then there's several unnamed or named stream crossings that are your standard corrugated steel pipe type crossing. So interactions with those crossings we'll have to take on a case-by-case basis as to what mitigation would be required, as well as any potential site isolation for fish and downstream waters for sediment erosion control. So an update, the Kilmarnock neighborhood, including Pump Station 3. We looked at access off the highway and down towards Argyle Creek, which is not well defined in the online databases, including the CVRD IMAP Atlas. The line work shown here is update based on our field visit. So what I'm showing here at the center is Montrose Park. This is the proposed site for Pump Station 3. And you have Kilmarnock to the right, and you've got two tributaries to Argyle Creek that run along the north and southeast sides of the park. In addition to that, the purple polygon at right is a wetland that was previously unmapped. It's approximately 1,000 meters squared. And the top left north corner of the property, there's an additional wet area. It's more of a depression that receives overland flow, more of like a slough than a wetland. But we did propose a setback on both of those. That's the cross-hatched area. So for access into the park, that would require a crossing site be established, meaning the channels that are alongside the road could be enclosed in a culvert for a crossing. It would be ideal to avoid impacts to the wetlands. So access is going to be limited potentially to the northern side there between the two wetlands, where you would cross perpendicular to the channel and enter the property from that side. However, when you enter the property, there's a substantial collection of standing dead wildlife trees, bird nesting habitat. The central portion that isn't in wet areas is a maturing mixed coniferous deciduous forest type. And it's succeeding to an age where there's quite a bit of die-off currently. And that's shown in the image here at center. There's a number of standing dead trees here that offer, moderate to high value wildlife habitat. So that would have to be factored into siting a pump station in this area as well. Implications in that are not only potential offsetting of habitat, but you would have to determine the species that are using them, some of which are protected year round, whether they're active or not. So there may be nesting sites in these trees that belong to species that we would have to determine whether they're being used, and if not, have they been used by those species that are protected, because that then extends the protection to a period of at least 3 years before you can remove those sites. Or you can request permits to remove, and then there might be some compensation requirements. That's all through the Federal Migratory Bird Convention Act. There's also wildlife, birds in particular, owls, raptors, that are protected under the BC Provincial Wildlife Act, and the listed species are also protected year round. Otherwise, there is a bird nesting window where if they're not active, trees can be removed if they're not belonging to those species that are specifically listed. Contaminated sites history in the Comarc neighborhood. There was nothing identified in the area proximal to Pump Station 3 in the Montrose Park. There was one site located at Argyle Road at the bottom of the image, the black dot, that's right alongside the highway. However, it was determined to be of low risk as there was records of remedial actions having taken place. This is a street view image of that location. So a summary of regulatory requirements from the environmental side. The bird nesting window that I just mentioned is March 15th to August 15th. In general, that's when they're active. So if there's vegetation clearing of trees occurring during this period, you need to have a bird nest sweep done by a qualified environmental professional prior to. Otherwise, if you're working outside that window and the birds aren't raptors, you can remove those the vegetation and trees as needed. The in-stream reduced risk window, this refers to in-stream works, aquatic habitats, and fish. So if you're going to be modifying stream channels, crossings, etc., that work is typically planned between June 15 and September 15. So that's the ideal window, opposed to the window to be avoided. And that can be site-specific. It's the general window, so there can be some modifications to that, but that's typically what's followed. It's likely that a DFO request for review or Water Sustainability Act Section 11 may be required for any works in and around water. This is specific to the Montrose Park in that there's going to be a new crossing opposed to crossing over existing that we would find through the majority of the project alignment. New crossings require a notification. However, if there's any enclosure of habitats such as the wetlands on the Montrose Park site, then you'd be looking at an approval level, which requires engineers' design and potentially offsetting compensation plans. The contaminated sites regulation, as mentioned, we recommend that the pump station sites 1 and 6 be looked at more closely to determine if there is any risk to the project there, and if so, what categorization it gets. One other update since the December 2022 presentation is to the contaminated sites regulation in BC, and that was updated this time last year in February or March 2023. And it increased the amount of oversight and sampling required for disposal of contaminated soils and the frequency of samples to characterize those soils for disposal. So at a site like one of the pump stations where we're looking at potentially removing soils that can't be reused, they have to be transported away. Those sites, those soils need to be characterized to a point that the receiving facility, a certified pit, would accept them. So it's looking at a certain number of samples by volume that's then supplied to that facility before they can receive those soils. And there's also likely archaeological permits required in those coastal areas in particular. So again, those pump stations could include number 3 in this context as well. So 1, 3, and 6 all potentially have overlap with archaeological sites, and there should be additional research and potentially permits on that. So in conclusion, although there are some risks, we have deemed that they're relatively low. As mentioned, the majority of the project is in existing roadways, in which case we expect there to be very little environmental impact. It's those sites where stream crossings may be required or impacts to existing wildlife habitats, such as those standing dead wildlife trees, that the risk is then increased. There are, however, ways to mitigate that through proper planning and permitting. Ideally, impacts are avoided, and where they can't be avoided, you start looking at options to mitigate or compensate. So in the case of stream crossings, the timing is a way to mitigate. Proper isolation and control of erosion sediment are a way to mitigate. And bird nesting habitat, again, ideally you avoid, but if it's unavoidable, there are ways to permit those impacts. And overall, covering the entire project, those risks can also be managed through implementation of BMPs and oversight by a qualified environmental professional, both by the proponent and by the owner. That is all.
Thanks so much. Questions? Andrew?
I've got an easy question and a harder question. The easy question, maybe. Water Sustainability Act approvals for modifying water courses. What's the likelihood of success on those these days? Because I've had experiences where it's just no matter what. And just so everyone has the context, Water Sustainability Act defines a water course as something, even if it's like being incredibly altered by mankind, it can still be considered a water course. And we've experienced development project where the answer is just no, you can't modify it. And the case I always highlight was in Powell River. It's connected to like 5 kilometers of downstream stormwater pipe before it hit the ocean. And it was a man-made ditch. And we wanted to move a head wall so where it flowed into the stormwater system about 5 feet, and we couldn't. So I'm just wondering, like, how big a risk is that bureaucratic hurdle to the project?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there is a risk there. It unfortunately does depend on who you speak to. So I've had cases where I've been able to move projects forward when everyone else said it wasn't possible, and we have gotten approvals. The devil's in the details. So if you can come up with a reasonable rationale where avoidance isn't possible, and you then have to modify, then putting a sound plan together that includes thoughts for creating a net improvement in habitat quality, either in that locale or elsewhere on the project, are often looked at positively as well. So if there's an impact, say we had to enclose a portion of wetland, as an example, we'd be looking at offsetting that with development of wetlands somewhere else that would provide benefit. And so if you put together a sound, robust plan, bring that forward to the approving officers, it makes it a lot harder for them to say no.
Okay. So I guess going forward, that's something that will have to be considered in the capital planning, because rebuilding wetlands is not a cheap endeavor. And I have the privilege of having worked with Destiny on development projects where we've done that. So it is possible, but it's a definite risk and there's a definite cost associated with it. The next question, and I kind of sprang this on you earlier, and I can see your scope of work didn't include this. The impact of removing septic field flow from the groundwater regime. And I did some quick math. We're talking it's between 800,000 and 1 million liters per day. So in drought conditions, it would be the only source of groundwater. And I still think we need in the reporting some analysis of that impact, and that's an impact on vegetation, and it could be an impact on, in certain more densely populated areas, base flows and water courses. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. And I'll just caveat that I did talk to an arborist, Verna Mumby,
Yes.
and her immediate answer was, oh yeah, all the cedar trees are gonna die.
Mhm.
So it could be a pretty considerable impact. So, but your thoughts on that, Dusty?
Sure, yeah. So whenever I look at the potential impacts of modifying a human-made situation, in which case septic fields are, you look at what was there prior. So in a relatively untouched water regime, those flows would have been absent. However, they would have been in locations where there was an established forest that also had water retention and slow release capabilities, which are also now absent. So you're basically taking away the natural as well as the modified flow regime that we've gotten used to, and you're not replacing it with anything. So yes, those base flows will be missed, and there will definitely be modified impacts to the vegetation type. Cedars are suffering everywhere as it is. So if you take away more water from them, yeah, they're not going to do well. We've actually, just as an aside, I put together restoration plans commonly for developments, and I've stopped recommending cedars altogether unless it's a really wet site, because I just know they're not going to make it. In which case, there's alternatives, but I think what you'll find is that these stream systems in particular, they're quite small. The majority of them, there's a few larger systems that we cross, and those smaller systems are very well reliant on things like the groundwater inputs through the dry season. And it's quite likely that they're going to start to dry earlier and stay dry longer. And so that's going to have a kind of a domino effect on the habitat quality in general. Specifically thinking about salmon. They do enter a number of these small streams. For example, the Argyle Creek system near the Montrose Park is a very small, heavily modified system, but there are salmon in it, and they're kind of just barely hanging on, in that they're typically coho fry that overwinter. They spend the year before they outmigrate as smolts, and there's just enough water to kind of keep them going. And so talking about removing water from the system, it's likely that those systems that are on the edge now are going to dry. So yes, there will be impacts. It's not part of our scope in that I'm not a hydrogeologist or hydrologist, and it's worthy of consideration, but ultimately it's not something we can mitigate. I think if you make these changes by removing those sources of water, they won't be replaced.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing. And I think it's really important to include that in the reporting and in the liquid waste management plan, because it seems like it's an unavoidable impact and it's going to be noticeable. And when trees die, people get really upset. So it'd be good not to surprise anyone with that kind of thing. And it just, like, I know I brought it up before, so I'm wondering if there's a plan now to have that in the final report. And that might, at this point, I don't know if I could endorse this report because it's missing that. And sure, it seems like a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it will upset people. It will cause an impact, and it's permanent. So I think it's really important we capture that in this.
Tabitha?
I have a question related to that. Maybe I understand that septic systems are, let off water differently, obviously, but if, because there's been lots of talks about keep collecting your rainwater in your old septic system tanks, would that, so it's obviously not the same, but would that provide some mitigation if that's, I don't know. I'm just.
There's definitely some ways to provide mitigation. For rainwater capture and reuse to be effective. So just an example, in my own yard, we have a garden plot. It's maybe 10 square meters, which is really small when you look at it. It requires about 5,000 gallons of water a year, and it's just vegetables. And the only reason we can actually keep it alive is because we run a shower into it all summer. So rainwater is one option. Gray water reuse is probably a better one. Unfortunately, our regulatory framework for that is not very supportive. But there definitely are ways to mitigate. They would all be voluntary though.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's hard to mitigate that risk on a voluntary basis.
Jim,
Yeah, I'm curious, you mentioned the Union Bay Estates lands. Was your firm involved with an EIS before all the clearing was done of all those trees down there? Because there was a lot of bird habitat in there that no longer exists. And I wonder what was used to mitigate that or provide alternative habitat.
Yeah, we weren't retained on that project, and I'm not sure who the consultant was, so I'm not aware.
can we just go back to Andrew's question? What is your what is your adaptation strategy for the loss of water coming from septic systems? Like, is it a change in vegetation? Is that like on residential properties? What is the kind of typical approach for that?
Well, I think what we'll see is in terms of the lifespan of a forest, it's going to be a short-term impact change. On the scale of our lifetime, it could be, pretty significant. So we'll see existing vegetation dying off, and there will have to be management of that through, danger tree removal and whatnot. And eventually a succession of a drier forest type will take place. So you'll start to see more of, what we tend to correlate with like a Douglas fir type forest, opposed to hemlock, western red cedar. Something that's typical of further south on the island will move into our area and start to take hold. Again, that's going to take decades, if not hundreds of years. So that's not a mitigation strategy. That's just likely the way things are going. And so in that, people could consider that next generation of forests on their properties and start planting species that are better suited to a dry climate. And with that, that would be voluntary, obviously. But with that would be watering as well as a mitigation strategy, where if people don't mind using their freshwater resources to feed the vegetation on their property, they can do so. But again, that requires an input into the system.
Yeah, having heard this now for the second time, it's sinking in a little bit more, and I do want to second what Andrew said, that I do think that this is worth including in the report. And just for the simple sake of people being able to plan accordingly for the next 5 or 10 years on their own properties, it seems totally reasonable to just alert people to this possibility. There's no point in investing in a cedar hedge of 50 trees to have them all die off in 5 or 10 years when this comes through. So it just seems reasonable to alert people to the possibility, at least.
Doug, is that something that you would be comfortable in adding to the report, some commentary around the loss of septic flow?
I mean, it would require quite a bit of conjecture on my part to, it's a potential outcome, but for me to state unequivocally this is going to be an impact is beyond the scope of our assessment. We would have to rely on other professionals to provide more input on that, in which case that might be verging into an entirely separate report. If it was a new section within the existing, we could address it as a potential impact that people should be aware of, and just keep it very general and high level without any explicit calculations or numbers associated with it.
Right. Is that what you had in mind, Andrew? Something like that, just alerting the public to that?
I think as a bare minimum, this is part of my professional area of practice. I don't know what kind of conflict of interest there would be for me helping with this. I could recommend some other professionals who I work with to do this, but like a hydrogeologist and hydrologist and someone who practices on-site wastewater. We were actually talking about that in my area of practice, my scope of practice is a little weird, just because of how my job, my professional life is come along. But yeah, you'll need someone who understands onsite wastewater flows and septic fields. You need someone who understands groundwater flow regimes. You probably need an arborist, I think would be fair, Dusty, and a QEP. Because it's a bunch of overlapping areas of practice. I don't think it'd be fair to just say to current it would just be conjecture because of their area of practice.
Yeah, otherwise we brought in other professionals like Andrew suggests.
Yeah.
It would just require a new scope to do so.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be a huge cost. Like it's a lot of easy assumptions to make to come up with some reasonable conclusions. But it does require a certain mix of professionals to put that information together. I think it's worth doing though. Like we're not talking a bunch of money. I think it'd be pretty easy to put it together. I'd be happy to outline a scope for free, and you guys can hire someone other than me because of my conflict of interest to get the work done.
Director Harbour.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's the first time I come to the table in the sessions, but this is a great topic, and I guess my piece on that would be maybe for something I haven't heard considered yet is along that topic. But I know in Hornby and Denman, a lot of people separate their gray water from their actual sewage. So I'm wondering from a project perspective, if this was encouraged in the future for people to develop gray water systems that can feed some of the vegetation. I know that at the old property on Hornby, that's the plan to sustain the cedar trees. The shower and the kitchen water are heading there, and the sewage goes into the septic. But what would be the impact to the sewage system if there was a massive move to gray water? That would be, would that be a significant reduction in flow, water, like those kinds of technical questions? I'm not sure I've heard it addressed along this process. It's very theoretical, but I think it's important because I think water is very precious. And if people find a way to save it, to maintain their landscaping and stuff like that, we know Union Bay Estates has installed purple piping, right? So it's beyond theoretical. There's actually a practicality, and people are starting to head that way. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
Thank you. Other questions or discussions about the environmental impact? Ian?
A question about Montrose Park, and this may be difficult to answer, but how would you assess the probability of siting a pump station in Montrose Park as low, medium, or high?
I think the challenges there are primarily from a permitting perspective rather than the suitability of the site itself. I think that there's certainly enough area. We might need to get a little bit creative in identifying the ideal location within that park to site it. And with that comes additional considerations for access off the existing roads that might require more or less driveway area depending on where you site the pump station. I think overall, the crossing to access the site is a fairly minor issue. I think that's easily achieved as long as you're avoiding those wetlands. And then the interior of the site where the concentration of wildlife trees are, there certainly appeared to be, and we didn't do an inventory, but they appeared to be more heavily weighted towards one side of the park than the other. So we would need to have, I think, a bit more specific information on what the operational requirements for the facility would be, their ideal siting, and then we can reverse engineer it to determine whether there would be significant impacts in that area to the nesting sites. But overall, I would call it moderate risk.
Other comments or discussion? Thanks, Doug. So now we're going to ask for a decision, right? So having heard the discussion, what is the pleasure of the committee at this point? And I guess probably the big decision is, and maybe I'll ask Derry for some comment on this, is would you be comfortable with an addition to the existing report that addresses the loss of septic water at a high level or do you feel the need for something more detailed? And if I could ask Derry how that might impact the schedule of moving forward.
Yeah, certainly. So if there is additions to the report that the committee would like to consider, we can bring those recommendations forward to the steering committee. And then I think if supported there, we can undertake that work and then bring it back either to this committee, or we can circulate it kind of by email and get consensus that way, and then take the report back, final report back to the steering committee for final approval.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'm happy to put forward a motion supporting the reporting with the caveat that some additional reporting on the impacts to groundwater flow and the impacts on terrestrial and aquatic habitat take place before it's finalized. So that would be my motion at this point. I think it's important that reporting get included.
Is there a seconder for the motion?
Second.
Ian, thank you. Discussion on the motion. Tabitha, we'll let you make the first comment. Comments or discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I mean, an email sounds like a great way to finalize that. I don't know that we all need to come back to sit down for that last point, if everyone agrees with that.
Tabitha?
Could I request if the steering committee is open to like the full scope of work with all of the engineers, not just the high level one, that we could just get a like executive summary in the email?
Rather than a 200-page report, are you saying?
Less technical would be preferred.
Okay. Thanks. Any other discussion or comments? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Oh, so go ahead, Ken.
A small point, can we just hear the motion again as a motion?
I can get Michael. Are you able to read it back for us?
Going to do it afterwards.
I understood the motion to be that recommend that the report go forward to the steering committee with the addition of a request for additional information, both on terrestrial and aquatic impacts of the loss of septic water. Is that consistent with what you have, Michael?
In my mind.
In your mind, okay. I see Andrew nodding, so if you're comfortable with that, okay, understood. Any comments then? No? Okay, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Perfect. Great. We'll move on to the briefing note then.
Okay, yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, there is a briefing note included in the agenda package, just describing the process for committee membership as the plan moves into that combined stage 3 process with the Comox Valley Sewer Service, LWMP. So the submittal of the addendum report to the province will mark the conclusion of the stage 1/2 LWMP addendum process. And per the terms of reference for this committee's per this committee's terms of reference, these committees were to dissolve at the conclusion of the addendum and be combined with the broader liquid waste management plan committees for the Comox Valley Sewer Service. The briefing note identifies a few agents. Identifies that for the technical and advisory committees or public advisory committees, there is a lot of overlap in membership, but the briefing note does identify a few agencies and groups that we have represented here that weren't historically represented on the CVSS LWMP process. And there's also the briefing note identifies that what we're looking for at this point is a decision from the public advisory committee resident members on who would be wanting to stand for primary and alternate going forward for the stage 3 process.
Thanks, Vince. So currently, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of this is currently we have 2 members from each area on the Public Advisory Committee. And what we will be looking for is a primary representative and an alternate. So conceivably, that if you wanted to continue on, conceivably, the 2 members could decide one to be primary, one to be an alternate, or you could choose to no longer be involved in because you've had enough of liquid waste. Is that correct, Vince?
Yeah.
So what we're hoping that you read this and gave this some thought, is to, I mean, I guess my hope is that just by agreement, we will have a primary representative and an alternate agreed to at this table, and that would go forward to the steering committee, right? And you would be appointed to the main TACPAC committee now. Andrew?
The slide says 3 members, 3 alternates for area A. And we're talking about 2 or 3 for area A.
It is 3. So
Okay.
one from, Royston, Kilmarnock, and,
Okay,
and Union
gotcha.
Bay.
One from each
And then
community.
alternates for
Yeah,
each.
I thought you just said 1 from the area, but it's okay. So it's 3 total from area A, 1 from each. All right. Just full disclosure, I'm on both committees already. So I'm one of the overlaps.
I will just add for those agencies that weren't originally represented on the CVSS LWMP, they will be receiving kind of an invite to join that stage 3 planning process as well.
So are there 3 members that, oh, Tabitha?
Can you just say again, what's involved on the next, like what's on the other one? What's the job in that one?
The big project.
Yeah, so as it stands right now, we're looking at the first stage 3 PACTAC meeting sometime this fall. And then there'll be another one in the spring of next year.
And that's just to talk about the entire upgrade of the whole system and everything like that?
That's right, yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, as a resident member from area A, you're bringing that area A lens to the process, so.
Yeah.
So are there 3 members that would like to volunteer to be the primary representatives to the larger project? Thanks, Norm. Thanks, Jim.
It's like old Union Bay.
Yeah. So Norm and Jim, and is there one more?
Tabitha and I have been in extensive discussions, and we would both like to be the alternates.
Tabitha, you gotta represent us young ladies, please.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll
Tabitha?
volunteer.
Well, congratulations.
And then the alternates, then the other 3. So
Yeah.
Ken, you would agree to be
Yeah.
an alternate? Thank you.
So I can reach out to Ryan and see what he's feeling like in terms of engagement in this
Okay.
next stage.
Okay. And would you like a vote on this?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so except for the last person, the last alternate, which will be left out. So could we then have a resolution recommending that Norm, Jim, and Tabitha be the primary representatives to the larger project, that Ken and Roseanne be the alternates, and a question mark on the 3rd one? Would somebody like to move it?
I so move.
So move in. Thank you. That's second, Andrew. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Well done. Okay. Shall we carry on?
Yeah.
Okay. CVRD updates. You guys are just way too efficient, you know? This is what this is what I've come to at the end of this process.
Yeah, sure. So I just have a few updates on a few items. Yeah, starting with this most recent one. This was a recent report brought to the Electoral Area Services Committee in February. This is regarding the CICC charges for the Sewer Extension South project. So there is a development cost charge review underway for the Comox Valley Sewer Service, and following that, there would be updates to the development cost charge and capital improvement cost charge bylaw for the sewer service. And as it looks right now, it's appearing that there will be substantial increases to those rates. So what we're wanting to prevent with these upcoming rate increases is having those applied to properties in existing neighborhoods in the Sewer Extension South area. So the recommendation in the report was to request to the Sewage Commission that the CICC rates be held at their current rates for existing properties in the South Expansion area. So that recommendation was approved by the EASC, and the request is to be considered at a future Sewage Commission meeting in the next month or two. The next update is on the septic deferral program that was discussed at the November TACPAC meeting. So we brought further information on this program to the steering committee in December, just with the same criteria that was presented at the last TACPAC meeting, being that any type 2 or type 3 system less than 5 years old at time of required connection could defer connection for a period of 5 years. This program criteria was approved by the steering committee, as well as a recommendation that the program would be written into the future sewer use bylaws as they are developed for the neighborhoods in the south. And then the last update is regarding the septic regulatory program that was laid out in a report to the EASC in October of last year and discussed at the PACTAC meeting back in November. We are making some progress on this in terms of next steps. We do have a public open house scheduled for the end of April. This will provide a broad overview of the proposed regulatory program for the public, and this is in support of order and council requests that we're aiming to submit to the province in the summer of this year. And then, pending success on that OIC process, next spring, there would be further engagement on the program, and this would be in support of a service establishment process to set up the program and to implement the regulatory bylaw. And if everything falls into place according to these plans, we would be looking at service startup in 2026. And thought I had a question slide in there, but yeah, if there's any questions on any of these.
Thank you.
updates,
Questions?
Yeah.
I think I've heard this from you, but can you just remind me what the service area or the whatever for that bylaw is? Like, what's the area?
Well, yeah, we're looking at the entire CVRD electoral areas, so areas A, B, and C. But I mean, obviously, if there is sewer service imminent in Royston and Union Bay, then you would, those neighborhoods would not be part of the program.
How would the service be funded? Would it be funded by overall, or like what would the funding look like to establish that service?
Yeah, so there's two components. Like for any of the work that the regulatory program would require property owners to do on their properties, such as septic pump outs or inspections, the costs of all that work would be arranged and funded by individual property owners. And then in terms of administering the program, there would be a modest property tax that would look after the overall administration of the program and any, future enforcement activities that would be required to ensure compliance with the bylaw.
And that would be electoral area wide then.
That's what's proposed at this point. Yeah.
I've got one more comment on the proposed changes to CICCs. You know, we've already talked about those numbers in this committee. I really do think that this whole process is in process, and it should be considered as a in process type of thing for CICCs. And future is a different story, I guess. But because it is in process, then I think that should be the determining factor. And hopefully the Sewage Commission will also agree that those numbers have already been put out to the public, and a change at this time won't go over well.
No, that's a good point. We do feel we have a pretty strong case to keep them at their current levels. And yeah, like you said, we're hopeful that the Sewage Commission sees it the same way.
Ken, you have your light on?
Sorry.
Did you want us to? Any other questions or comments? Okay. Carry on, Vin.
So as we were at the last meeting, we're way ahead of schedule, but this is kind of our final agenda item here. We've laid out some dates here in terms of next steps for consideration of the draft addendum report. And I think given the committee's recommendation to include a little bit of extra work, these will likely change, but we will be bringing forward the report with the committee's recommendation to the April 8th steering committee for the addendum, which is the Electoral Area Services Committee plus the chair of the Sewage Commission. That will also go to the Liquid Waste Management Plan Steering Committee for the core area, which is the Sewage Commission. And then I guess pending consideration of those additional items that could come back in front of both of those committees at their May meeting before final submittal to the province. And at this point, we're looking at the first meeting for the combined Stage 3 PAC-TAC in the fall of 2024. So yeah, and that's kind of timelines, but I guess in terms of upcoming work for next steps, we will be starting detailed design for the project this year, and that'll include kind of all of those elements that we've discussed today, the topographical survey, additional environmental assessment, geotechnical, archaeological studies, and those will all kind of go into an updated design and Class B cost estimates that will be included in that Stage 3 liquid waste management plan that will be submitted to the province for final approval. And so all of that work will be brought forward to the public for consideration at future engagement events that are part of that Stage 3 planning process. And then internally, we'll also be turning our mind to bylaw development for these new services. So looking at the development of bylaws for those sewer local service areas. So those service areas that will fund and manage the neighborhood collection systems, as well as potential sewer use bylaws and other types of bylaws that will manage the system. Andrew?
Question on detailed design. Will those design assignments go out with requests for proposals, giving local firms a chance to bid? That's my Chamber of Commerce hat on.
Yes, they will.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on next steps? So I guess just thinking about the additional work that the committee's requested to be added to the report. Maybe just a confirmation that the committee's okay if we circulate the results of that work, if supported by the steering committee by email as opposed to convene an additional meeting. Is that generally supported? Okay. Okay, and so we'll just try and get consensus via email that everybody is okay with the additional work that's been done, and then we can move forward to final approval of that draft report. Yeah.
That's a conclusion of our work. Yeah, this is what I was just going to do too, is to just thank you from my point of view for being such a congenial and, at times hard-hitting group. Yes, lots of tough questions slogged through, Tabitha especially, long technical reports, reluctantly maybe sometimes. But it's been a real pleasure working with you all, and I hope you all feel very proud of the really important role that you've played in this process so far. And I mean, the work carries on, but just from my point of view, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful group to work with, and personally, this has been a really fun project for me to be a part of. I've really enjoyed it. My husband doesn't understand that, but I've just really enjoyed being a part of this process. So, Derry, did you want to?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah,
Thanks,
yeah. Just to echo Allison's comments on behalf of the project team, we really appreciate all of the work and time and effort that all of you have put into this process. I think, not just reading all the background materials and attending these meetings, but also getting out there and contributing to the public open house events and talking to your neighbors, and really just assisting us in gaining as much input as we can into this project and moving things forward. So thank you so much. Yeah.
I was just going to ask too, Mark or Vince, anything that you want to add to the committee?
No, again, just as Terry said, it's been great getting to know you all at this table and working with you, and helping move this project forward.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing for me, but it's I think it's a lot to ask of these committees, and I know everyone volunteer, all the public members volunteered, but I don't know if you always know what you're getting yourself into, and we do ask for a lot. And thanks everyone for your participation. It's a great process. The liquid waste management planning process, although very time consuming, it does a great job of engaging with the public and ensuring that as much as possible, everyone's aware of the project and supportive.
And maybe I'll give the last word to you. Any comments that you would like to offer before we close and hopefully have lunch? Yes.
Yeah,
Jim.
as a resident representative, I'd just like to thank the committee and all the staff people for trying to involve the public as much as possible and try to get the message out there. It's so important that people feel that they have had some involvement, or at least an opportunity to be involved, particularly when we're talking the kind of money we're talking. So I think the staff have done a great job with those sessions that they held at the open houses of getting that message out there.
Sorry, Director Arbor, did you?
Okay. I'll echo Jim's comments and actually Ian's comments from earlier about the excellent work on public outreach. I've been involved in a lot of public outreach, and sometimes it's hard to get people involved. Mark might remember the water supply strategy. We had public open houses, we had like 2 people. No one seemed to care. So it can be really hit and miss. And I think the team has done a great job in getting the public involved. I know I was saying, well, let's make sure we know who we're talking about, but it's been excellent. I also want to thank the consultants, WSP and Current Environmental. I'm probably missing someone. Consultants often don't get a lot of praise or thanks, but they do a lot of work in the background. And I thank the consulting team for being engaged and for taking questions seriously and for answering them. So that's great work on their part. Thank you.
Director Arbor?
Yeah, thanks. And echoing as well, but I think it has been really high quality of input by the participants here and the committee members. Really appreciate it. This project is a huge roller coaster. It's been going on for roller coaster started in the 1990s, really. And so here we are at this latest iteration. There's still some ups and downs to come, as I'm sure, as you commented, not all the public tends to show up at the last second, right? So the closer we'll be to be really real, there's been really strong engagement, but I expect there'll be some people that will weigh in later as well. What you've done is establish a really strong foundation for the project, where when I'm being asked questions, I reflect on your discussions, and so many details have been gleaned over. So that's really appreciated. And hopefully in 2026 or 2027, you'll all get a little invite to the ribbon cutting ceremony if we make it that far. So thanks so much, and look forward to lunch as well.
Thanks, Director Arbor. Any other final thoughts from committee members? And I'd be remiss without saying thank you to the staff. It's a pleasure for me to work with such dedicated, sincere public servants. I mean, we're very lucky, I think, in our part of the world to have people of this kind of caliber to work with. And so thank you to you too. Tabitha, did you want the final word? No? Okay. All right. With that, we'll draw the meeting to a close, and thank you. And I think lunch is going to be here at 11:30. Yeah. So hang on.